Last time we were talking about symbolic thinking and Salome, Oscar Wilde, um, also symbolic thinking in other modes, other ways of thinking, Marx's symbolic thinking, Nietzsche's symbolic thinking, Vervaeke's symbolic thinking. And so we're taking this a little further. We're going to look at the hemisphere hypothesis, which has to do with the two hemispheres of the brain. And Ian McGilchrist's, he's got a couple of books. The new one's called The Matter with Things, came out in 2021. How our culture has been damaged, our society has been fragmented by an improper focus on the left hemisphere way of seeing things and a neglect of the right hemisphere way of seeing things, that mode of attention that the right hemisphere affords. And we have a sense that, oh, it's just a quick fix. All we need to do is use our technology and our wealth. Those are our keys, and we can just fix the environment. We can have more housing. We can clean up the seas from poison. We can protect indigenous peoples, and then we can go on being focused on technology and wealth. And like, just that's what it means to be human. More technology, more wealth. That's what it means to be human. And the end goal is wrong. And so that modern way of seeing things is lacking a positive view of what it means to be human. It's this kind of value neutral sense of freedom, a value neutral sense of, oh, inclusion, just include everybody without any kind of value judgment as to like better or worse or excellence or mediocrity. And that's not going to work. The result, in fact, what's the result of this overemphasis on neutrality and staying away from values, staying away from the right hemisphere perception of the story arc, the meaning arc, and just trying to stick with clear, plain old facts, is that we throw the culture into the lap of the multinational corporations and the marketing gurus, and they just have a field day because that fits perfectly into the consumerism model. Consume more and more, more and more. There's no end. And there's no end either in terms of time, like when is this going to end, nor in terms of a philosophical end, a purpose, a meaning. And that vision of humanity has been wreaking havoc with the world for the last 100 years or so. And so this is the vision. The vision that I'm critiquing is that I am a modern person. I am value neutral. I'm trying really hard to not oppress anyone. That's my main goal. I want to not oppress anyone. I don't want to inflict any values on anyone because that's the worst thing you can do in the world. And so I'm not going to promote any particular value. I just want to maximize everybody's freedom. That's the only value that matters. Maximize freedom. Zero guidance, zero value guidance. Absolute tolerance. Erase. So there's a couple of things here. One is erase the memory. When we educate our people, we don't have a coherent culture. We don't have any value structure because we don't want to memorize. We don't want to remember the culture of 2,000, 3,000, or 100 years ago because those people were benighted, bad people. And we're so much morally superior to them. So why should we read Plato? Why should we read Beowulf? Why should we study music from the Middle Ages or art that is so backward? And we're so much more, and we have progressed so much further beyond that. So we erase the memory. The second thing is that we enslave ourselves to who? To the multinational corporations, to big tech, to Apple, to Google. We're at the mercy of liquid modernity. Images, noise, the kind of constant rattle and hum of the technology that is beckoning for our attention, that's in our pockets, that's on our screens, on our walls. It's when we're driving, it's when we're working out, it's when we're trying to have a family dinner and notifications keep going off. This is the supposed freedom that the modern person is pushing for. What's a more meaningful freedom? Well, it's to have a memory, a historical memory of my people, of my past, of my legacy. It's to have a definite vision of the human, of a human end, of a human purpose, of like what does it mean to be fulfilled, as opposed to be not fulfilled, as opposed to be like stunted and immature. But you don't want to call anyone immature because that's making a value judgment. Well, I mean, who's more oppressive, the person who doesn't have value judgment and never gives any guidance to the immature person, or the person who demands excellence and maturity? And I would submit that it's the person who's totally value neutral. They're the most oppressive person. In their efforts to be totally unoppressive, they're ending up the most oppressive. And so we need to think, and we don't need one value because we are a multicultural society, but a multicultural society by definition has cultures, has values, and those values are going to be in conflict, but there's going to be some common ground, some big common ground. There's going to be some big areas of conflict, but cultures are cultures, which means they have values which they defend. And it doesn't make any sense to have a multicultural society if you don't have the values and the cultures that are positive, that are not neutral. And so if I want a culture of liberty, equality, the pursuit of happiness, Republican government, respect for minorities, that doesn't come out of nowhere. That came out of a specific history. And okay, I'm sitting in the West, in the United States, and Plato, Cicero, Magna Carta, the English language. I mean, these things have enabled all those values, all those principles to get developed. And it takes a lot of work and hard work in history and the history and the literature and the philosophy to bring us there. And it's a misconception to say, oh, we can just kind of leave all aside like the Plato and the Magna Carta, and we can just start building from where we are. But that's like trying to build the third floor first. You can't, you're going to just crash. You need to lay the foundation solidly first, then you need to build the first floor, then you need to build the second floor. You can't have the third floor without the foundation and without the memory, without the history of where we've been and how we got to where we are today. And it's not just a matter of following procedures. Yes, so a multicultural, this is the goal, I think, that I'm submitting. Multiculturalism, a real multiculturalism, a real conversation between real people, between real cultures, which really disagree. And they don't all always get along. And that's the conversation that modernity must have. I'm going to pick on a politician right now. And I don't know this person, and I think he's a likable person, but I think he's wrong. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada currently, and he has the idea that we're going to have no value but inclusion. Diversity makes us strong. And I agree with the diversity makes us strong. That's what multiculturalism is. And you go to Canada, and I love Canada. It really is multicultural, just in a very similar way to America. But you can't have no value but inclusion. That's like having a non-value. That's like having zero. No, we need real values about a fulfilled life, about a fulfilled humanity, about a fulfilled society in order to really progress. Um, and it's like other things that I've seen, which are kind of so neutral and so vacuous that they're trying to be non-oppressive, but they end up oppressive. Like, and I'm picking on specific uh, people here, but Rice University has the uh, motto unconventional wisdom, unconventional this, unconventional scholars. And it's like, okay, so you're going away from convention. Okay, that's kind of cool. You're being new. But like, what's the real value that you're pushing towards? Like excellence, wisdom. They you know, they don't want to use the word wisdom. That's too like value laden. So um, it's got to be unconventional. Like, so we're just going to be a rebel against what? I mean, anyway. Or Seinfeld, the television show Seinfeld, which actually I enjoy watching. I think he's a brilliant comedian, but it's a show about nothing. And and over the course of the 10 years of the show, nothing happens. No one develops. No one gets married. No one gets further on in life. They're just kind of like permanent seventh graders never getting out of middle school. And now they're in their upper 30s and maybe even 40s. And that, in a way, is a description of liquid modernity, where in the effort to have no values, you've left the whole generation or multi generations stunted, unable to grow, unable to develop into fullness. Um, and 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 so, let's see. Do I have a PowerPoint here? Hold on a second. I do. And so let's do it. Okay, so let's go to the PowerPoint here. Share screen. I'll just do the regular share screen. And I always have a hard time figuring out view. Oh gosh. Slideshow. Okay. So yeah, that's okay. This is a slide from last week. The Marxist, the Nietzschean, and the Ravakian symbolic thinking. I was promoting the Ravakian version. I was saying that there's some truth in the Marxist and the Nietzschean one, but that Ravaki, pulling from the Western tradition and the Eastern tradition, he's got yin and yang from from Taoism in the East, Dionysius and Apollo in the West. Excuse me. A multiplicity versus a single viewpoint and approach, and that it is oriented towards development, towards challenge, towards suffering, and through that suffering and that challenge to pursuing growth and maturity. So, and then we have our friend Justin Trudeau, who says the following. He says that hate speech is communication that expresses detestation or vilification of an individual on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. Okay, not controversial, fairly fairly straightforward here. We don't want to promote hate speech where people attack others ad hominem without any reasoning and do harm to those people through that hate speech. Like a Nazi parade through a Jewish neighborhood or something like that, where it's just deliberately meant to harm people. And yet it is important to preserve freedom of speech. And that's where Trudeau gets into trouble here. He is making his promotion of this idea of policing hate speech, of policing speech, and in the context of this earlier provision, which prohibited online speech likely to expose a person or persons to hatred or contempt. And so, hold on a second here. There we go. And according to the Wall Street Journal, where I was reading about this, this promotion of this law and this rule by Trudeau was condemned as a violation of free speech by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and by leftist U.S. linguist Noam Chomsky, who called it outrageous. And it's outrageous, and I'm agreeing with Noam Chomsky here, because it's so broad and it's so violent against free speech, because anyone can claim that this person detests me. Well, maybe they were just disagreeing with you. Can we have strong disagreements or not? And apparently not. Especially, well, Justin Trudeau's on the Liberal side, so he's going to be mostly going after people on the Conservative side. But it cuts both ways. And these kinds of things will come back and bite you on the behind when you're not looking. We've seen that in the past. And obviously there are limits to freedom of speech, and we don't want to allow hate speech, as I said, like things like Nazi parades through a black neighborhood, an African American neighborhood. There's no purpose for that. But there is a place for freedom, even for Nazis and for people whose views we find maybe even full of hatred. Rather than just locking up all of those people or preventing them from speaking, there has to be some measure of freedom of speech, as long as we keep in mind protecting those who need to be protected. So good. And the neutral attempt, the attempt to be neutrally value neutral, is problematic for that reason. And because someone thinks, oh, I'm just neutral, I'm just trying to be inclusive, then they're blind to the aggressive violence that they might be inflicting on those who are trying to exercise freedom of speech. Okay, enough said about that. I was going to talk, let me just talk for a second about dolphins, because we recognize a fulfilled dolphin life. It's got room to swim in clean water. It's got plentiful food. It's got its fellows, male and female dolphins, to swim with because they need to socialize. It's got the capacity to reproduce. It can have children. It can rear its children. It can grow old with its fellows. That's a fulfilled dolphin life. Clean water, fellowship, capacity to reproduce, rear its young. And when I'm saying humans have an objective way of living a fulfilled life, and it's not just a matter of opinion. It's a biological reality, just as it is with the dolphin. And in fact, there's a lot of these similarities. Now, humanity has a lot more complexity, because then there is going to be a difference in what values we're going to hold, and those are legitimate differences. But there still needs to be the clean water and the proper food and the proper fellowship and the capacity to reproduce and rear their young. Like, all those things are common no matter what values we hold. And so there is this objective element, a big objective element, in what it means to be a fulfilled human being that I'm arguing for against Justin Trudeau, for example. And as I was saying earlier, when someone tries to have this neutral identity, what do they end up being? Well, because you have no memory of the past, or very limited memory, you basically have the last 10 years of memory. Like the stuff that I've seen on TV and movies, that's me. That's my culture. It's the things that I'm seeing in the mall, Nike, my Mets jersey, my Houston Astros jersey. Like, okay, those are legitimate parts of my identity. But is that it? is it just this bourgeois multiculturalism that we're in favor of? Stanley Fish had a brilliant article years ago. Stanley Fish, the English professor and law professor, called Bourgeois Multiculturalism. I think he had it in a book, but it also was published as an article, where he says, like, is this all multiculturalism? Is this bourgeois multiculturalism where, okay, I'm in favor of different food, like I can get Chinese food and Mexican food, but what about like actual differences in culture, like where there's strong differences? We don't talk about those things. We kind of erase those things. What about the ideas of fullness and completion that lie in these cultures? And so, in the case of Seinfeld, picking on Seinfeld again, the person is reduced to the perfect consumer. And there's a famous Frogger episode where the characters are kind of reduced to like a video game character. Or Jerry Seinfeld, never, he's constantly sort of dating, never moving on, never actually developing a life as an adult. And so, as Thomas Hibbs writes in his book, where he talks about Seinfeld, the book is called Shows About Nothing. He says Seinfeld focuses almost exclusively on the lives of single individuals for whom family life seems improbable, if not impossible. And we have a laughter, but it's this kind of detached and mocking laughter, never a kind of full laughter, I would argue, and Thomas Hibbs is arguing. And so the hemisphere hypothesis, let me get back to the hemisphere hypothesis. And so, and the fact that I'm saying we've got a culture that's reductionist, we've got a culture that reduces things down to a dumbed down level instead of the richness of experience that we should more properly focus on. And in his book, Ian McGilchrist talks about rot and MUMBO. And these are the two extremes that modern culture tends to go towards, arguing about what's really out there in terms of what I'm perceiving, in terms of objects, perceiving objects, and in terms of perceiving values. And so on one extreme, you have the people who say, oh, it's just the reality that's out there. It's just plainly out there. There's no interpretation. There's no complexity. It's just plainly out there. That's a naive realism. That's this neutral view. Like, oh, it's just an object. It's just a house. It's just a cup. It's just a society. There's nothing to be interpreted. And it's imagining a view from nowhere that's totally objective. Like, oh, I can be totally objective and just look at the plain old facts and not try to get into any values, because values are imprecise and like and they're basically subjective and not really true. And it's also imagining its view as not shaped by language. So that's the reality out there extreme. It's kind of hyper naive realistic, naive realism. But then there's the opposite extreme, which is naive individualism, which is the MUMBO extreme, which is a brilliant formulation by McGilchrist. He calls it made up miraculously by ourselves, MUMBO. Made up miraculously by ourselves. And this is the romantics, the people who say like, oh yeah, I wanted so much to see my beloved out there, and there she was, like, because my love brought her forth. Or it's saying like, oh, because I have such a romantic vision, that's what's real. And no, sorry, just because you want it to be real doesn't make it real. So that's the opposite extreme, where your idealism, you think your ideas are more real than the material reality. And so what would be a better vision, says McGilchrist, And he says, what's better is an embodied and cultured, interpreted culture, an interpreted vision, where I see myself as I'm a participant in reality. I am the meeting place of consciousness and the world. And so let's go to the drawing board for a second here and see if I can say something about this here, where, okay, hold on a second, okay. So you have me, and I'm looking out at the world, and in a certain sense, so what McGilchrist is saying is, it's not that this is the rock, the reality out there. Hold on a second. There we go. But that I am the meeting place between world and consciousness. That's what I am. That's who I am. That there's this consciousness part, and there's a material part, and they're always already interacting, and that's what it means for there to be consciousness, because consciousness is always consciousness of something, of a tree, of a scene, of something in front of me. And as I'm conscious of those things, the values are always already there, because my values and my projects are at work as I perceive. Because how do I know what's relevant? As I do my relevance realization, I need to know, in this scene in front of me, which has, let's say, 2 billion pixels of information in it, am I going to look at all those 2 million pixels of information? No, it's impossible. I need to focus on the 10 or the 20 of them that are relevant to what I'm looking for. I need food right now, so I look for the cup so I can, or the spoon so I can pick up my soup. And I don't notice all the other things going on around me. Or if I'm hunting for a rabbit, or I'm hunting for a mate, I'm looking for those particular things, that quick movement in the bush that is the sign of the rabbit, and then I ignore everything else. And that's how the world manifests itself to me, through attention. Sorry, my drawing's getting really dirty here. But through attention. So reality doesn't just hit me, I attend to it. And that is the way my consciousness is disposed to whatever exists. I nurture the real into being. I am attentive and I respond. So this is what McGilchrist argues in his book. So I would point you towards McGilchrist. Ian McGilchrist, brilliant neurologist and humanist. And this is in contrast to a materialist vision or a physicalist vision like that of Sam Harris or his wife Annika Harris. And they would argue, and maybe I'm putting a little bit of words in their mouth, but I think this is accurate. They would argue that because you can't pin down a precise purpose or potential, those things are irrational and not real. That the values and projects, it's really hard to pin those down in terms of purposes, in terms of like what's really precise and measurable. I can't do an experiment on those things. Like I can do a chemistry experiment on some kind of substance that's in my beaker. I can't do that with my values and my projects, so therefore they're not really real. They're things, and they're not something that I can measure. But that's just wrong. I mean, those things are just as real, even if they are impossible to measure, or not. In fact, are they totally impossible? Not even totally impossible. They're just hard to measure. And so I want to shift and talk about a play from Samuel Beckett, and it's called Waiting for Godot. Waiting for Godot. And this is a great play, a wonderful play. And it's also really good at giving us a vision of the materialist vision, the reductionist vision that I've been critiquing, the kind of value neutral vision. And you have a story that pushes to the very limit of being deprived of story logic. Like, what if you had a story with the most minimal amount of story logic and purpose and potential, these things that Sam Harris has been objecting to as being irrational and unreal. And this is so much so that even like time itself is kind of hard to pin down in this play. At times it seems like this play takes place over the course of 2 days, but sometimes it seems like it's been taking months. And you have this very vague and very variegated sense of what's going on here. And that's what happens when you reduce our world to this really bare minimum. And at the end of the first scene, or the first act, there's 2 acts, and at the end of each of the acts, they've been waiting for Godot the whole time, and at the end of each act, a character comes in and says the following: "Mr. Godot told me to tell you that he won't be coming this evening, but surely tomorrow." And then he goes. And so all this waiting, and then the announcement that he'll come tomorrow, all this waiting, and then he'll come tomorrow, an endless cycle. Going nowhere. No end, no purpose, no meaning. So it's a beautiful kind of experiment in like the most reduced down story. He jokingly said, I think Beckett jokingly said, it's the play where nothing happens twice. And it's really true. And you strip the human to the most minimized purpose, the most minimized story. And yet it fails brilliantly. And it fails in a way that shows us that you can't reduce the human story, or a human story, so far. And what makes it fail is love, the fact that we love these 2 men. There's these 2 characters, Vladimir and Estragon, and they're not very likable at different times, and they're kind of dumb, and they can't understand each other, and they fight with each other, and they're so human, and we love them, and they love each other. And these things, so there's something that breaks through, there's something transcendent, that there's something storied that breaks through. And it's like the image that comes to mind is that of a grass field that someone wants to pave over and turn into a parking lot. So they kill all the grass, they cover it with concrete, but sure enough, there's a little crack in the concrete and the grass breaks through. And it's just impossible to kill off the grass. Just as it's impossible to kill off the human element, the transcendent element, the value element in these stories. And so some of the things that happen to Vladimir and Estragon point to this, where at one point Vladimir and Estragon's talking. Vladimir, he's the more active of the 2. Estragon's very kind of stationary, doesn't move around a whole lot. Vladimir's moving all the time. Vladimir says, "Astride of a grave and a difficult birth, down in a hole, lingeringly the gravedigger pulls out the forceps." And I know it was hard to follow. What you see is an image of a birth and of a death, all in one scene. And in a way that Vladimir's kind of saying, like, that's what human life is. Like, you're born and pretty soon you're dead. And like, how long is that interval of human life? It's really short, actually. And it can seem totally meaningless. Um, and 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 so it's, you know, Heidegger talked about dread, like the experience of humans, of experience of life, of being, as being towards death, and and there's something true there, that we are mortal, and at all moments we're striving towards fullness, but we're also wrestling with the reality of death and mortality. So this play meditates on that brilliantly. And at different moments, the two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, think about killing themselves, because that sort of makes sense at various moments. And at one point, at the end of the play, actually, Estragon says, "Why don't we hang ourselves?" Vladimir, "With what? You haven't got a bit of rope?" "No." "Then we can't." And then Vladimir takes the rope, which is his belt, and he pulls it out, and his pants fall down, and everybody laughs in the midst of our tears as we're facing these two men wrestling with committing suicide. And it's comedic and tragic at the same time. Brilliant. But you can see there's meaning there. We love these guys. We don't want them to commit suicide. We're glad that they don't, and in fact they don't. And so the meaning, like the grass through the concrete, breaks through. The signpost towards purpose, towards meaning, towards that more full life is there. The restlessness never goes away. These two men love each other. They're friends. Friendship is real. They don't kill themselves. Earlier in the play, they're thinking about committing suicide earlier. And as they're talking, they say, "Wait a minute, we can't. Because what if one of us fails to die in the hanging? Then he'll be alone." "Oh, you're right. Then let's not let's not kill ourselves." So they know, like, we need each other, even as they're facing the possibility of committing suicide. And so, as this hemisphere hypothesis plays out, I'm arguing for the right hemisphere. We need both hemispheres, but we really need to develop the meaning side, the patterns, the overarching gestalt that lies behind the material that we're seeing, so that we can pay attention, that we can realize the relevance of what's important to me at this moment. What's the meaning to me? And does that mean I haven't accurately perceived the world because I'm perceiving it in terms of what it means to me? No. That's the only way to accurately perceive the world for a human being, is to have both the objective and the subjective elements working together. Because, as I said, we can't even see what's there unless we know what to focus on and what to leave out, what's relevant and what's irrelevant, what's the figure, what's the background. And ultimately, I need not just me perceiving it, but I need other people. I need a community. I need dialogos. I need to communicate with others and talk about, hey, what do you see there? And that's why we have this shared task of, like, the university or intellectual communities or reading groups where we can study together, and we need that give and take, as well as reading what did Plato say through 2,400 years ago, and what did what did the author of Beowulf say, what did Aquinas say, or Descartes. Like, I need to see what those guys said and put them into conversation and not just forget all that if I really want to have a rich, full understanding of what's real. And so, getting back to Vladimir and Estragon, they, at one point in the play, they're not doing anything, they're just talking, and they run into this fellow, Pozzo. And there's a lot to be said about Pozzo. He's not a really nice guy. But they see him in the second act, and he's fallen on the ground, and he's blind, and he's very vulnerable. And Vladimir, the energized character of the two, says to Estragon, "Let us not waste our time in idle discourse." Pause vehemently. "Let us do something while we have the chance. It is not every day that we are needed, not indeed that we personally are needed, but at this place, at this moment of time, all mankind is us, whether we like it or not. Let us make the most of it before it is too late." And so they go and they help Pozzo, who's down on the ground. And Estragon, who's the more staid and less movable of the two, he's trying to figure out, should we help this guy or not? So this is before they help him. And Pozzo offers to pay, and Estragon says, "How much?" And Pozzo says something, and he says, "That's not enough." And so this is the more reductive vision, like, I don't need to act in this loving fashion. It's the same event. It's the same Pozzo. Man on the ground, Pozzo's lying on the ground. Two men perceiving the event with different ways of perceiving it because of the way they're disposed to the world, the way that, in a certain sense, their value structures are allowing them to perceive the world. And in the end, because they're friends, they communicate, and they do end up helping Pozzo off the ground. So friendship does win out in that specific instance. And so I was listening to Annika Harris. She's the wife of Sam Harris. She's also a scientist, writer, brilliant woman. And they were talking about consciousness. and like, okay, how is it that I perceive the world? Like I've been talking about, I'm kind of obsessed with this question, as you may have noticed. And Annika Harris makes the argument, this is with Lex Friedman, that my perceiving of the world is a controlled hallucination. It's inaccurate. I don't really see correctly. It's a hallucination. And I'm wrestling with what does she mean by this? Because if I'm not conscious of my own consciousness, what am I conscious of? And obviously we can fool ourselves, and I think she's getting at something true in part, but I think she's ultimately wrong, because if you call what we're perceiving a hallucination, a controlled hallucination, our knowledge, yes, it's always limited. That doesn't make it a hallucination. There's always a spectrum of like accuracy, and we're always learning, so we're always gaining more information about whatever object it is that I'm looking at, and I can walk around it, and I can like grab it or take off part of it if it's a car, like to understand it more. But it's true knowledge. If there's such thing as false knowledge, then there's such thing as true knowledge. So we get true knowledge. I would submit that's how we're perceiving the world. And so the song for today, what is it? Is this song Good Life from OneRepublic. I was practicing this a little bit. I think I can play this and sing it somewhat accurately. And I want to critique this song because I think it's wrong. He's saying, I want to have this good life. I want a good life. And the minute you say I want a good life, you're kind of living that fear of missing out, FOMO. I'm so afraid I'm missing out. I want a good life. And you're kind of desperate. And that also is an image of what liquid modernity is, where you're not really living your life fully because you're so afraid of missing it. So here's my attempt at this song. Come on. Okay, it's not doing it. Okay. Yesterday, found myself in the city in the Piccadilly. Don't really know how I got here. I got some pictures on my phone, new names and numbers that I don't know, addressed to places like Abbey Road. Day turns to night turns to whatever we want. We're young enough to say, oh, this has gotta be a good life. This has gotta be a good life. This could really be a good life. Feeling that you can't find. The city's on fire tonight. This could really be a good life, good life. Oh, my friends in New York, I say hello. My friends in LA, they don't know where I've been for the past few years or so. Paris to China to Colorado. Sometimes there's airplanes that can't jump out. Sometimes there's bullshit that don't work out. We all got our stories, but please tell me what there's to complain about. You're happy as a fool. Take you over where everything is out. Gotta take it in. Oh, so it's gotta be a good life. It's gotta be a good life. So really be a good life, oh, it's a feeling that you can't find. The city's on fire tonight. This could really be a good life, good life. Oh, good life. It's gotta be a good life. It's gotta be a good life. This could really be a good life, good life. It's a feeling that you can't fight. The city's on fire tonight. This could really be a good life, good life. Listen to my friends in New York. I say hello to my friends in LA. They don't know where I've been for the past few years or so. Paris to China to Colorado. Sometimes there's airplanes that can't jump out. Sometimes there's bullshit that don't work out. We all got our stories, but please don't tell me what there is to complain about. Oh, and I'm gonna pause there. So, let me share my screen here. That wasn't really as smooth as I wanted it to be, but anyway, as I was saying, the the ambiance of the song is trying to be happy, but it's so pathetic. Where it's like you're saying I want a good life. Okay, what is a good life? It doesn't tell you. You don't really know what that is. A good life for this guy is like more experiences, more extreme experiences, more cool experiences, more let me be cool, let me hang out with the cool people in the cool places and listen to cool music so I can put it on my Instagram account. That's the full life. That's liquid modernity. That's scary. If that's what you want, and you can hear it in a way, at least I can hear it in this song and in this guy's voice, that he's depressed. Where okay, I've been all over the place and like I have all these great experiences in Abbey Road and like hanging out like with the Beatles. This has got to be a good life. This has got to be a good life. This could really be a good life. This city is on fire tonight. This could really be a good life. Really? It's so unimpressive. And he says, okay, he says he's happy. When you're happy like a fool, let it take you over. When everything is out, you gotta take it in. That's it. What about like, joy? What about like giving yourself, building something important, having a mission? There's none of that. There's none of it's like completely empty. And I skipped this part of it because I wasn't sure how that goes. But he's saying kind of the same thing. Hopelessly, I feel like there might be something that I'll miss. That's the fear of missing out. That's what's driving him. Nothing but that. There's nothing objective. There's no real true value. Something transcendent. Something beyond a momentary experience that is driving this poor fellow. And that's scary. So don't get stuck in liquid modernity. Don't buy into that reductive vision of what it means to be human. Read long books. Read new books. Read ancient books. Read Lao Tzu. Read the Tao Te Ching. Read Aristotle, Plato. Read the Aeneid, the Odyssey. Go for wisdom. Don't satisfy yourself with the last 10 years of consumer goods and consumer things on Netflix as if that's going to give you a meaningful life. You'll be stuck in FOMO like this poor song. And that's it.